It's the Brian Lehrer Show. I'm producer Amina Serna, filling in for Brian today. Good morning again, everyone. This week, millennial women got some news that might have felt a lot like a betrayal to some. If you came of age in the 2010s, you probably know the Everlane look. The kick crop jeans, almond toe loafers, the perfect crew neck. It was a sort of unofficial uniform of the upwardly mobile millennial. And the best part was that it was all ethically made, or at least it was supposed to be. Everlane built its name on what it called, quote, radical transparency, telling you exactly where your shirt was made and what it costs to produce. Shopping at Everlane allowed you to vote for your values with your dollars. If you cared about labor rights and sustainability, you could support those causes without compromising chicness. So imagine the shock of some consumers when the news broke that Everlane had been acquired by Shein, the fast fashion giant that Everlane was basically founded to be the opposite of. And we've got breaking news during the show that deal has been finalized at an undisclosed price, over $100 million. So, how do we get here? And what happens when the poster child of sustainable fashion runs off with its arch nemesis? With me now to discuss is Elizabeth Klein, author of the books Overdressed, The Shockingly High Cost of Cheap Fashion, and The Conscious Closet. Her piece in The Atlantic is titled Everlane-Shein and the Limits of the Ethical Consumer. Elizabeth, welcome back to WNYC.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So let's go back to the 2010s for listeners who aren't familiar. What was Everlane and what made it feel so different at the time?
Yeah, so Everlane was really kind of representative of this moment in the early 2010s when sustainable fashion had this palpable momentum. They were part of a group of really sort of buzzy brands. I think Reformation and Allbirds were the other two major players that kind of exemplified this direct-to-consumer model. They, cut out the middlemen. They were less expensive than luxury brands, but more expensive than fast fashion. And most importantly, they were kind of vaguely ethical. They were trying to do things differently. And I think they led consumers to believe that, we could have it all. We could look good and shop with our values. And those companies did so well for a time. And it just made it feel like sustainable fashion was really going to change the industry for the better.
Everlane promised its customers radical transparency. What did that look like?
In the beginning, radical transparency was really mostly about pricing. So if you go back, way back to a decade ago, a lot of customers, we just didn't know if you were paying a markup, were you actually paying for quality or were you just paying to pad a company's profits? So Everlane started out just offering pricing transparency. Like, here's where that $40 you pay for a top is going. But over time, that transparency really evolved and they started to offer more information about where their products were made. Even today, if you go on their website, you can see inside of the factory where your top is made, for example. And they started to experiment with using more sustainable materials, more responsible production methods. So I think in the beginning, maybe the transparency was a bit empty, but it did really evolve over time.
So bring us to this week. What was the deal between Everlane and Shein that's making the headlines and this deal that seems to have closed during the show today?
Yeah, so the news just broke and it is official that Shein, which is a fast fashion behemoth that was founded in China and really rose to prominence for anyone living under a rock and who doesn't know what Shein is. But they really kind of grew to dominate the fast fashion space during the pandemic. So Shein has acquired Everlane. It is official. And I think that this news, you said it well in the top, it's just kind of been shocking. And there's this real sense of betrayal because Shein, probably more than any other fast fashion company, has been so closely associated with human rights violations in their factories, child labor. They have a huge carbon footprint. Most of their products are made out of polyester, which is sourced from oil. So, it's just a pairing that doesn't make sense. It was very shocking, and I think for even the people who work within the company and the CEO, it's just a bit head spinning about how you can have a company founded on those kinds of values acquired by a company like Shein.
Listeners, calling all recovering or maybe even current Everlane shoppers and anyone who's ever tried to shop their values. We want to hear from you. If you used to buy clothes from Everlane or other sustainable brands and stopped, what made you stop? Did inflation change the way that you shop? And be honest, do you still factor in sustainability when you decide where to spend your dollars? Or has all of this made you give up on the idea? However you're feeling about the Shein news, call or text us at 212-433-WNYC. That's 212-433-9692. How much did venture capital and private equity have to do with building Everlane and brands like it?
I would say that's out of my wheelhouse, but there certainly is criticism of Everlane being venture backed. And, there's this sense that they were always kind of more beholden to their investors than smaller, more independent, sustainable brands that have been able to be true to their values. And I think that maybe the sale to Shein is evidence of that. But what I will say is that this moment where Everlane is being acquired by Shein, it kind of comes on the back of a lot of, I think, low moments in the movement for sustainability overall. The fashion industry is just reeling from tariffs, from the Trump administration's attacks on environmental policy. It's really, really difficult right now to be a responsible company. And so from that standpoint, it's not just Everlane that's having a hard time. It's really the entire fashion industry in general. And I think sustainability has just kind of had to take a backseat in recent years.
As the sustainability category took off, you write that greenwashing became a problem across the whole fashion industry. So what is greenwashing and what does it look like?
Sure. So greenwashing, I mean, quite simply, it's advertising that is misleading or overstating your environmental credentials. So it could be a company that just says, we're green, we're sustainable, but they don't offer any information to qualify that statement. It's empty, it's misleading. And when sustainable fashion started to really take off in the 2010s, other companies, of course, were like, wow, this is something consumers really care about. And I will say consumers still care about it. Gen Z certainly cares about it. And we can talk more about that. But it became very easy to just copy a company like Everlane, look sustainable, use all of the right words in your advertising, and undercut companies that were trying to do better. In Europe, I have to say there has been a lot more efforts to rein in greenwashing through government enforcement, and those efforts have been much, much weaker in the United States. And I do say in the piece for The Atlantic that is just one thing that really has been missing in the U.S. Because of our, political crisis that we're in and all of the attacks on sustainability. It's just been difficult to get real momentum going behind standards so that consumers aren't so easily duped and tricked by companies that are misleading about their green claims.
Listeners, we can take a few of your calls here, especially if you buy from sustainable brands or brands that you think are sustainable and haven't stopped. 212-433-WNYC. That's 433-9692. And to your piece, you do write about how the movement has not stopped. You talk about a newer brand in this lane, Quince. Where do they fit into all of this?
I think Quince, if you look at their website and their marketing, it is very closely aligned to the way that Everlane markets itself. Um, I think that they are, mostly kind of copying the marketing without as much integrity and transparency as Everlane. And this is just another good example of why uh, we need standards set at the policy level so consumers can tell the difference. But this is like kind of underscoring another shift that's taken place since Everlane came along, which is there's just more competition in the space that they're in, right?
Mm.
So when they kind of came into being, Gap, which also does basics, wasn't doing so well. J. Crew had kind of fallen out of favor. Those companies are all kind of back. They're popular again, and I think it's just become more difficult to be a basics brand, not to mention just a sustainable brand.
Here's a text. It should be mentioned that a major blow to Everlane's reputation was the layoffs of the customer service workers who were organizing to unionize, as well as the allegations of internal harassment based on racial identities. It's hard to justify paying a premium when the company ethos rings hollow from inside the boardroom. And you wrote about this in your latest piece. You want to tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, so in 2020, Everlane, there were two major employee-led campaigns against the company that did really tarnish their reputation. One was there was a allegation of systemic racism. So employees, current and former employees, they actually put out this letter, this public letter, kind of documenting that Black workers were experiencing pay gaps and sort of anti-Black hostilities and microaggressions in the workplace. And at the same time, they had a handful of workers. I think your caller said that they were customer service. Actually, I can't quite remember at this moment, but they were a group of workers that were organizing. I believe they were the first group of Everlane workers to organize, and they were indeed laid off. And the employees at that time, they said, this company says it's founded on radical transparency, but it's really selective transparency. They're very focused on their supply chain, but what about us? What about the workers in the company? And I do think that that was one of those moments, much like the moment we are experiencing right now, where those of us who try to shop with our values, we say, wait a minute, what does it mean when even the good guys are getting things so wrong? And I think that the company has done a lot to address those criticisms since then. I'm perhaps, I think we all get to decide whether they've done enough. But that certainly was one of those moments where people just really questioned what the sustainable fashion movement was really about.
Mm. We have a couple of listeners texting that are kind of grappling with this news. Here's one. Listener writes, I don't know what to do with Everlane now. It was practically my uniform for years. Even now, within arm's reach, I realize there are 5 Everlane pieces, including the pants I'm wearing. I just felt good about them. The look really fit me. The price was good. Felt like quality and ethics, but not too much out of reach. Now, I just don't know if I can shop there again, though I don't want them to fail, even under this ownership. To what extent do we know what this sale means for the company?
I know as much as, well, I was going to say I know as much as the listener, but I did just read the CEO's statement, which is that they are committed to their values. They say at this moment that Everlane is still Everlane. I also, this is not a popular opinion, and most people or a lot of people do not want to give Shein any space to change, which I understand. But Shein, I do have to point out, they have been called out so many times. They have had a sustainability officer since 2021. They hired someone new, I want to say the end of last year. Um, I do think that this is, of course, part of them trying to rebrand themselves as more socially responsible. So
Hmm.
that is perhaps a silver lining, which is that we went through this with H&M and Zara, calling them out, the media, consumers, until they slowly, painfully started to get better. Um, it could be that that is what we're seeing with Shein.
Mhm.
I feel like I'm going to get taken to task for saying that, but it is possible that that is what the company is trying to do here.
Right, a broader movement to sort of muddy these waters between sustainable fashion and what we call fast fashion. We have a caller who works in women's clothing wholesale. Lisa in Middletown, New Jersey. You're on WNYC. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, good. What would you like to say?
I have worked in the industry, in the fashion industry, selling clothing for over 30 years. And there have been times where I was working with companies or aligned with companies that took a huge stand on sustainability, organic cotton, low impact, carbon footprint, water, saving water, special dyes that didn't really hurt the environment. And some of my retailers were just kind of like, okay, whatever. They were really not interested. They were more like, I love the style, I love the price, I love what it looks like, and they were really all of that took a real big backseat to what was really the mission of these companies. And now I think it's different, that people are more concerned about natural fibers and where things are coming from. But about 6 or 8 years ago, these companies, they didn't make it. They didn't make it at all. So it's interesting to see that this whole thing, like how Everlane had taken such a stand on that for so long, and I had seen it, in the past, and it wasn't working for them. And it's amazing to see, like, even that so many people cared so little about it, but they were more concerned about the price of it and what it looked like and the styling and
Hmm.
how quick they could get it and the turnaround and all those things, instead of what those companies really stood for. It was
Right,
interesting.
right. Lisa, thank you so much for your call. Elizabeth, what are you hearing in Lisa's call there?
I mean, I think that Lisa's comments are capturing what a lot of people are fearful of right now, which is that sustainability is a losing venture. But I don't think that that is necessarily the takeaway here. I think that interest in sustainability waxes and wanes. It certainly is very tied to the economy because sustainable production does cost more. But there are a lot of companies, that are still doing well, that are sustainable. I think Reformation is still doing well. And then also, uh, if you look at big companies, it is very commonplace now for major companies to have to use some sustainable materials, to be tackling their carbon footprint. So I would say, like, what's changed is sustainability has become more onboarded. It's more, I think, just a way of doing business within the fashion industry. Um, it's certainly not all companies, but like if you look at Puma or H&M or Stella McCartney or Levi's, these are companies that do a lot on sustainability, and that's really what's changed. I think one thing that I'm fearful of is that you need the Everlanes, you need the independent companies that are putting pressure on the rest of the company because they kind of set the bar high. They say this is everything we can do as a company. This is like we're going to the outer limits of what counts as a sustainable or socially responsible company. And I just don't think the same kind of pressure is going to apply now that they've been absorbed into Shein. And the last thing that I'll say is that I think that Everlane is partially suffering because they are a basics brand, and we have gone back to a maximalist moment in fashion. People want to wear prints, they want to wear colors. So, I guess I hate to say it, but that boring millennial uniform that we all wore 10 years ago is just not really what's in style at the moment.
The caller, Lisa, also flagged sort of the tension between wanting to have something of a high quality, but also not wanting to pay that much for it. I mean, we're also experiencing a lot of inflation these last couple of years. How much is that part of the story here?
I think it's a huge part of the story. I think we're seeing that consumer that's in her late 20s, early 30s, living in a big city who would have bought Everlane 10 years ago, that consumer is probably shopping thrift. That's the other part of this conversation we haven't really gotten into is if you're a sustainable fashion consumer, I think secondhand clothing has become a major part of your wardrobe, and there are just so many more options now for buying secondhand than there were 10 years ago. But yeah, I think that inflation is such a huge part of this. It's part of why Shein is so successful because people they don't have a lot of disposable income right now, and clothing could be the thing that maybe they want to treat themselves, but they're not going to buy a pair of jeans that's $60 or $100.
Here's a text to that. A listener writes, I'm trying not to buy any new clothes at all right now, thanks to my low salary. I thrift all the way and have been learning how to sew my own clothes. So a reflection of what you were saying there, Elizabeth. And another text that asks sort of a meta question that I think is, perfect, that you're perfectly posed to answer. Somebody writes, isn't the entire fashion industry non-sustainable almost by definition? In order to be a sustainable clothing shopper, one can purchase almost any item and use it until it's no longer functional. The most impactful behavior is to stop chasing fashion. Elizabeth, I mean, the subtitle of your book overdresses the shockingly high cost of cheap fashion. What do you make of that text?
I think that kind of gets at a conundrum that we all face if we're committed to changing the fashion industry. I'll say that Shein put out a really interesting report a couple of months ago where they surveyed how their own shoppers were using their clothes. And a lot of people didn't want to hear this, but they found that even a lot of Shein consumers wear their Shein clothes, 30, 40, 50 times. And it really kind of pushed back on this notion that everybody's just buying fast fashion and wearing it once and throwing it away. So we certainly have to have this mixture, right, of changes in consumer practices where we're not being so consumptive and always buying something new, and we're taking care of what we own. So we're taking responsibility on a personal level for how we shop. But we also have to keep calling out companies and saying, Shein, you're never going to be sustainable. You're never going to be good enough, because they are listening. It is what pushes them to change. It is the only reason why a company like Shein has a sustainability team, is because of people holding their feet to the fire. And I would actually say that rather than people, walking away from Everlane, I think we're all going to be closely watching what they're doing and just really kind of taking them to task to hold true to their values and to continue to make products in a better way. And then just because I'm a policy wonk, I'm just really hoping things start to change after the midterms, and some of the policy momentum that we had around sustainable fashion will come back, and that piece will be back into play as well in the years to come.
Listener puts it so succinctly, I have to read it on air. They write, sustainability is not that complicated. Buy less stuff and wear it until it falls apart. So, Elizabeth, as we are wrapping up here in this segment, you just started talking about a couple of policy reforms that you think might be on the table after the midterms. I presume that you're talking about policy proposal put forward by Democrats. What are you going to be keeping your eyes on?
So California, we're seeing a lot of like state level policies that are exciting. So California was able to pass a textile waste law, I think in 2024, that went into effect in 2025, which will hold companies responsible for paying into a system to collect and process their textile waste. I think that that's something that could work on a national level. The EU has already done something similar. California also passed a law requiring companies to reveal the amount of their carbon emissions and work to lower them. We certainly need to get back to regulating fashion companies' carbon emissions. I'm pretty sure Shein still has the largest carbon footprint of any apparel retailer in the world, so that would be something that they really need to work on. And then I'm also closely paying attention to the New York Fashion Act, which was reintroduced a couple of times in, I think, 2021 and 2022. And it's kind of the most comprehensive bill that would really kind of hold companies responsible for their environmental and human rights impact. So there's a lot of different things going on. It's just that, again, we're kind of in this holding pattern where there's been this really big backlash to sustainability. And yeah, to your point, like once maybe the Democrats regain a little bit more power, that'll start to unthaw and we'll see some movement again.
Elizabeth Klein is the author of several books, including Overdressed, The Shockingly High Cost of Cheap Fashion, and The Conscious Closet. Her new piece for The Atlantic is titled Everlane-Shein and the Limits of the Ethical Consumer. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.